In the shadowed halls of power where empires are born and broken, one truth echoes through the centuries. The fall of civilizations rarely begins with the roar of invading armies or the fury of the masses. It begins with the quiet failures of those entrusted to lead. Rome, the eternal city that once commanded the known world, did not crumble in a single cataclysmic day. Its collapse was a slow unraveling, threaded through decades of leadership that chose denial over wisdom, comfort over sacrifice, and personal ambition over the survival of the state. The marble columns still gleamed under the Mediterranean sun, the aqueducts still carried life-giving water, yet beneath the surface, the foundations were already cracking under the weight of incompetence and hubris. No one understood what was coming next, but the signs were there for those willing to see them. The Roman Empire at the height of its glory stretched from the misty forests of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of North Africa. Its roads connected distant provinces in a web of commerce and control, legions marched with disciplined precision, and emperors were hailed as living gods. Daily life in the capital pulsed with vibrant energy. Senators debated in the forum, merchants haggled in crowded markets filled with spices from the east and slaves from conquered lands, while gladiators fought in the Colosseum to the thunderous roar of thousands. Citizens drew water from grand fountains, bathed in opulent thermae, and celebrated festivals that reinforced the divine favor of Rome. Families gathered for meals under oil lamps, children learned the virtues of duty and empire, and soldiers on the frontier stood watch over a peace that seemed unbreakable. Yet this world of order and abundance masked deepening fractures that no amount of spectacle could hide forever. The leadership that had built such magnificence was beginning to erode from within, blinded by centuries of success. Early warning signs emerged like faint tremors before an earthquake, invisible to most, but devastating in hindsight. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, a series of emperors rose and fell with alarming frequency, often through assassination or civil war, rather than natural succession. The military, once the backbone of Roman strength, became a tool for personal power, with generals and emperors prioritizing loyalty to themselves over the defense of borders. Economic pressures mounted as inflation spiraled out of control, heavy taxation crushed farmers and merchants, and debased currency undermined trust in the state. Barbarian tribes along the frontiers grew bolder, not merely raiding but seeking settlement within Roman lands. Leaders dismissed these movements as temporary inconveniences, choosing short-term appeasement through bribes and treaties that weakened imperial authority. The collapse did not begin with chaos. It began quietly, in the decisions made in lavish palaces where emperors surrounded themselves with flatterers instead of competent advisors. By the time the signs became clear, it was already too late for many to change course. Rising tension gripped the empire as internal divisions deepened and external threats multiplied. The split between the western and eastern halves, formalized under Diocletian and Constantine, created rival centers of power that often worked at cross purposes. In the west, emperors like Honorius retreated to the safety of Ravenna, far from the ancient heart of Rome, leaving governance to ambitious ministers and generals. The reliance on foederati, barbarian mercenaries integrated into Roman armies, seemed a pragmatic solution to manpower shortages, but it sowed seeds of disloyalty. Corruption flourished in the imperial court, where bribes determined appointments and resources meant for frontier defenses vanished into private coffers. Famine, plague, and economic stagnation eroded public morale, while religious controversies between pagans and Christians further fractured social cohesion. Leaders failed to address root causes, instead pursuing personal vendettas and lavish building projects that drained treasuries already strained by endless wars. The air in the provinces grew thick with uncertainty, as farmers abandoned fields, merchants shuttered shops, and families whispered fears of what the next season might bring. Key decisions and critical mistakes accelerated the empire's descent. When Visigothic leader Alaric demanded fair treatment and land for his people after years of service to Rome, Emperor Honorius and his court responded with arrogance and broken promises. Stilicho, the capable general who might have stabilized the West, was executed on false charges of treason, removing one of the last competent defenders. Instead of reforming the tax system or strengthening alliances, leaders indulged in court intrigues and theological debates while the frontiers burned. The failure to integrate migrating peoples humanely, combined with repeated betrayals and massacres, turned potential allies into vengeful enemies. Heavy conscription and punitive policies alienated the very populations needed to sustain the legions. These choices were not made in ignorance alone, but in a system where short-term survival of the ruler trumped the long-term health of the empire. The machinery of state, once a marvel of administration, ground slowly under the weight of incompetence, favoritism, and denial. The moment the system began to fail arrived with visceral finality in the year 410. Alaric's Visigoths, long pushed to the brink by Roman duplicity, marched on the eternal city itself. For 3 days, the streets that had known triumph and glory echoed with the sounds of looting, screams, and the crash of breaking doors. Smoke rose from sacked villas and temples, while terrified citizens huddled in churches, seeking sanctuary that the emperors could no longer provide. The sack of Rome sent shockwaves across the Mediterranean world. News traveled slowly along crumbling roads, carried by refugees and desperate messengers, shattering the illusion of invincibility that had sustained the empire for centuries. Leadership failures had left the city undefended, its walls neglected, its granaries empty, and its armies fragmented. The event was not the cause of collapse, but the visible rupture, the point where the quiet erosion became undeniable catastrophe. Provinces began to slip away as local strongmen and barbarian kings filled the vacuum left by a paralyzed central authority. Human consequences unfolded in waves of suffering that reshaped societies from the forums of Rome to remote villages. Famine followed the disruption of trade routes, as granaries were pillaged and fields lay untended. Disease spread through displaced populations, while banditry replaced law and order in the countryside. Families were torn apart, mothers watching sons conscripted into doomed campaigns, fathers losing daughters to slavery or worse. The once proud Roman citizenry descended into survival mode, bartering heirlooms for bread, fleeing to fortified hilltops, or pledging allegiance to new barbarian overlords who offered protection where emperors had failed. Social breakdown was profound. The complex bureaucracy that had governed millions dissolved into localized fiefdoms. Knowledge preserved in libraries was lost to fire and neglect. And the cultural unity that defined Roman identity fractured along ethnic and religious lines. Fear became the dominant emotion. Fear of the next raid, the next famine, the next betrayal by those in power. The silence that followed the fall was haunting, broken only by the wind through ruined colonnades and the distant cries of the displaced. In the long term, the historical impact of these leadership failures reverberated far beyond the fall of the Western Empire in 476. The power vacuum gave rise to the medieval kingdoms that would eventually form the nations of Europe, blending Roman law, Christian faith, and Germanic traditions into something entirely new. The loss of centralized authority preserved fragments of classical knowledge in monasteries, while allowing innovation in local governance and warfare. Yet the rupture also ushered in centuries of instability, where literacy declined, infrastructure crumbled, and the dream of universal empire faded into legend. The Byzantine East endured longer, a reminder of what stronger leadership and strategic adaptation might have achieved. Rome's collapse served as a cautionary mirror for future civilizations, illustrating how the arrogance of elites, the erosion of institutional trust, and the failure to confront uncomfortable realities can unravel even the mightiest powers. Its legacy endures in language, law, and the very idea of what a state can achieve, and how easily it can be lost. The echoes of Rome's fall linger in the ruins that still stand across Europe and the Mediterranean, silent witnesses to the cost of leadership unmoored from duty. What remains is not merely stone in memory, but a profound lesson carved into the fabric of history. Empires do not die from external blows alone, but from the internal rot enabled by those chosen to guide them. In the quiet moments before dusk, as shadows lengthen over forgotten forums, one can almost hear the whispers of the past, warning those who wield power today. The collapse was a process, not an event, a slow unraveling driven by human choices that favored the moment over the ages. And in that truth lies both tragedy and the faint hope that reflection might yet prevent the repetition of such irreversible rupture. The Eternal City taught us that greatness is fragile,